In the last video, we spoke about the card group component that is included with semantic UI. Let's now flip back over to our code editor and try implementing this inside of our campaign index component. So back over here, I'm going to create a new function that we will use to create this card group component. I'm going to add a new function called render campaigns to my component. Then inside of here, we're going to iterate over our list of campaign addresses. And for every separate address, we're going to create a different object. Each of those objects will represent one individual card. So they will have the header property and the description property. So back inside of render campaigns, I'll say const items, just like we saw in that code snippet over in the browser a second ago. We'll then iterate over our list of campaigns by using the mapping function. So I'll say this.props.campaigns.map. Remember how a map works. We pass a function into map. That function will then be called one time for every element inside of this array. That function we pass in also gets called with each element in the array. And then whatever we return from that inner function will eventually be assigned to the items variable over here. So inside of the map function, I'll add in address and then our arrow function. And inside this, we're going to assemble one individual object to represent one individual card. So we'll say return our object. It's going to have the header property, which is going to be the text that we want to display as the header of the card. And for that, like we saw in our mocks just a second ago, we want the very top text in the card to be our campaign's address. Then underneath that, we want our description property to be a link to go view this particular campaign. Now we haven't discussed how to navigate between different pages with Next.js just yet. So rather than going into that very deep, long discussion right now, let's just add in a temporary solution. I'm going to put in an anchor tag without any href property or anything like that. And we'll come back later on and learn a lot more about how to work with navigation. So right now we'll just give it the text view campaign, like so. Now I am going to add on one additional property to this. We'll add the property in and then we'll talk about what its purpose is. So I'm going to say fluid is true. So what is this for right here? Well, if we go back over to the example inside the browser, you'll notice that this group of cards right here appears to have some arbitrarily constrained width to it. In other words, the width of this card doesn't appear to automatically stretch over to the far right hand of its container. By adding on that fluid is true property, it causes our cards to look like what you see right here, where every card is going to stretch the entire width of its container. And if we think back to the diagram or the mock-up that we were looking at earlier, that's definitely what you and I want. So we want this thing to stretch from the far left-hand side to the far right-hand side. But of course, it's not going to interfere with or somehow kind of impact this create campaign button that exists on the right. So that's why we're adding on the fluid true property. So this statement right here is going to give us our list of objects where each object represents a single card. So now we can use this items array to create our card component and return it from this render campaigns function. So I'm going to say return card.group items, like so. And then let's not forget that we have to add an import statement for the card component to the top of this file. So I'll scroll back up to the top and I'll add an import statement from card, or for card I should say, and don't forget the curly braces here because we are importing just one component out of the React Semantic UI library. So we're going to import that from Semantic UI React, like so. Now the last thing we have to do is make sure that we call that function from our actual render method right here. So we don't want to be just printing out the first address anymore. Instead, we want to show this big list of nice looking cards to our users. So I'm going to replace this.props.campaigns at 0. I'm going to leave the curly braces in here because we're still going to make a function call, or we're still going to reference a JavaScript expression. And inside there we'll say this.render campaigns, like so. All right, let's not forget to start our application back up at the terminal. So we just killed the terminal a moment ago when we installed the semantic UI React module. Remember that to start our application back up, we can run the command npm run dev. So we'll execute that. We'll wait just a second for everything to boot up. And in just a second, yeah, there we go. So we'll see compiled successfully. So let's now go back over to our browser. I'm going to refresh the page manually. And after just a moment or two of boot up, we'll eventually see some content appear on the screen. All right, there we go. Okay. So that's kind of interesting. The content definitely updated. You see how we have the address right here? However, we have view campaign as well, so we definitely know the changes that we just made went in and went into effect. However, we don't have a nice looking card like we saw in the semantic UI React documentation. So clearly something is not quite going on correctly here. So let's take a quick pause. We'll come back to the next video and figure out exactly what's going wrong.